I came home from deployment to a photo of my husband on another woman's desk. 3 weeks. That's all it took. 3 weeks after I stepped off a military transport at Fort Bragg, after 9 months in Kuwait, after Derek held me at the airport and cried into my shoulder and told me he'd counted every single day I was gone. 3 weeks, and I was sitting at a desk in Manhattan, staring at a silver picture frame that would end my marriage. Let me back up. My name is Major Bree Calloway. I'm 35 years old, and I spent 14 years in the United States Army, the last several in the Finance Corps, managing budgets that would make most corporate CFOs break out in a cold sweat. I've briefed generals. I've untangled fraud in multi-million-dollar contracts. I've sat across from men twice my rank and never once let my voice shake. I thought I understood pressure. I thought nothing in a conference room could ever rattle me the way incoming fire could. I was wrong. It turns out the thing that finally broke my composure wasn't a battlefield. It was a frosted glass partition in a midtown office building. I was 6 months out from separating from active duty, enrolled in something called SkillBridge. It's a real Department of Defense program if you're not familiar with it. It lets service members spend their final months in uniform interning at a civilian company, translating everything we learned in the military into something that'll actually get us hired on the outside. My orders had placed me at TechSphere, a fast-growing tech firm working under the VP of Corporate Strategy, a sharp, easygoing man named Gregory Stanton. On my first morning, Gregory shook my hand like he meant it. Major Calloway, we're glad to have you. I know your background's in Finance Corps, and honestly, that's exactly why I wanted you on this next project. Happy to help, sir, I said. We're in the middle of vetting a potential partnership, he explained, walking me down the hallway. A financial firm called Sentinel Wealth Partners, brand new but growing fast. Their whole pitch is built around serving military families, investment planning, insurance products, all of it marketed specifically to service members and veterans. Given your background, I want your eyes on their materials before we sign anything. If there's something off, you'll catch it faster than any analyst we've got. I nodded, filing it away as just another Tuesday. I had no idea I was about to be handed a magnifying glass and pointed directly at my own life. I should say something about who I was before that morning because it matters for understanding everything that came after. I grew up outside Savannah, Georgia, the daughter of a school teacher and a man who drove a delivery route for 31 years without missing a single shift. I joined ROTC in college because it paid for my tuition and stayed in uniform because I discovered somewhere in that first year of officer training that I was good at something that actually mattered. Keeping people accountable, keeping systems honest, making sure the numbers on a page reflected the truth of what had actually happened. 14 years later, that's still what I do, whether the ledger belongs to an infantry battalion or, as it turned out, my own marriage. Derek and I met at a fundraiser for a veteran scholarship fund 8 years ago, back when he was still a junior analyst at a mid-sized firm, and I was a captain 3 years into my career, home on leave and mildly allergic to small talk. He'd made me laugh within the first 5 minutes, which was rarer than it should have been, and he'd asked good, specific questions about my work instead of the usual vague thank you for your service platitudes people default to when they don't know what else to say. I married him 18 months later in a small ceremony at Fort Bragg, my father walking me down an aisle lined with folding chairs, Derek in his best suit promising in front of everyone I loved that he understood exactly what he was signing up for, a marriage that would require patience, distance, and trust in equal measure. For years, I believed he'd kept that promise. I believed it through 2 deployments, through birthdays, celebrated over grainy video calls, through the particular loneliness of spending Christmas morning 8 time zones away from everyone I love, comforted only by the knowledge that someone back home was keeping the lights on and waiting. That belief was the ground I stood on. I didn't know, walking into TechSphere that first morning, that the ground had already given way months, maybe years earlier, and I simply hadn't fallen yet because no one had told me to look down. My desk sat against a frosted glass partition. On the other side of it was a young woman with long, softly waved hair and the kind of easy, warm smile that wins people over before they've said a word. She turned to me almost immediately. "You must be Major Calloway. I'm Paige Sullivan. I'm on the marketing coordination team. Welcome to TechSphere." "Thank you, Paige." "Bree's fine," I said, shaking her hand, already running through my mental checklist for the day. Review onboarding files. Read the Sentinel Wealth materials. Find the coffee machine. And then my eyes landed on her desk. Not because of anything about her. Because of a small silver picture frame sitting beside a potted succulent, catching the light like it had been polished that very morning. In the photograph was my husband. There was no mistaking him, the navy polo, the one I bought him the year he passed his advanced officer training. The same half smile, the same dimple on his left cheek. Behind him, a stretch of coastline, palm trees leaning toward turquoise water. I recognized it instantly. It was the trip we'd taken to celebrate him finishing his reserve commissioning course 3 years into our marriage. That photo had lived on our nightstand for years. I had framed it myself. Now it was sitting on a stranger's desk in an office I'd been in for 11 minutes. A high, thin ringing started in my ears, like all the blood in my body had rushed somewhere and then drained out just as fast. I didn't fall. My knees didn't buckle. But something inside my chest folded in on itself, quiet and total, the way a building implodes. No explosion, just a controlled, silent collapse. I've been in situations where my life was genuinely, technically at risk. I know what fear feels like when it's chemical, immediate, animal. This wasn't that. This was slower and somehow worse. The particular, specific devastation of watching your entire life get quietly rewritten in front of you while you're expected to keep smiling. I didn't ask questions right away. I sat down, opened my laptop, and typed nonsense into an empty document just to have something to hide behind. Then I turned, forcing my voice into something light. Breezy. The voice of a new employee making small talk. Who's that in the picture? He's handsome. Paige's whole face lit up, like I'd just handed her the one topic she'd been waiting all morning to discuss. She pulled the frame a little closer, tracing the edge of the glass with one finger like it was something sacred. That's my boyfriend, Derek. We've been together 3 years. Honestly, it's my favorite picture of him. I keep it here for motivation. She smiled wider. We're getting married at the end of the year. 3 years. Derek and I had been married for 8. That meant since our 5th year together, since before my first deployment to Kuwait, since before the second one. My husband had been building an entire second life. I kept smiling. It was the smile I learned to wear during budget reviews with difficult commanding officers, the one that gives away nothing. Congratulations, that's wonderful. I'm so nervous, Paige said, holding up her left hand. Under the office lights, a diamond caught fire, a large radiant cut. The kind of ring that doesn't apologize for itself. He proposed last month. Said he wants to give me the wedding I deserve. We're looking at venues in Midtown. My throat went dry. Derek had told me years ago that he didn't care for flashy things, that a wedding ring should be simple because love isn't measured in carats. I believed him. I wore a thin gold band he said suited our life. Practical, understated, like us. I had actually been proud of that simplicity. Now I understood. He hadn't disliked luxury. He'd just been saving it for someone else. What does he do? I asked, keeping my voice level. He's building his own investment firm, Paige said, casual as weather. It's called Sentinel Wealth Partners. He's incredible. The whole thing is about helping military families with their finances. He works constantly, but he says it's all worth it if it means taking care of people who've served. Sentinel Wealth Partners. The engineers in Trini, or EITs, make smart choices out their loans, make smart choices out the program. My husband had built a company on the language of serving people like me, and he'd done it with a woman who had no idea I existed. Where'd you two meet? I asked. A financial conference in Charlotte. He was a guest speaker. I went up to him afterward to get his card. She laughed, a little embarrassed. He was pretty guarded at first, kept saying he was too busy for anything serious. I didn't let that stop me. He told me I was the one who finally made him want to settle down. Settle down. As if he hadn't already settled down. As if there wasn't a marriage license with his signature on it in a folder back at our apartment. Then Paige asked the question that nearly finished me off. What about you, Bree? Are you married? I looked at the photograph again. His smile in that frame was the exact same smile he gave me every night when I got home. A smile, it turns out, can be split cleanly down the middle and still look completely whole on both sides. 8 years, I said, without changing my expression. Paige's eyes widened. 8 years. Wow. I bet things are nice and settled by now. She laughed softly. I've heard after a while people just get comfortable. Kind of coast. She said it without an ounce of malice. She had no idea she was talking about her own fiancé's marriage. Every word still landed like a blade. I nodded. Comfortable's its own kind of happiness. I turned back to my screen. On it was the onboarding checklist, the Sentinel Wealth Partners folder, and underneath all of it, the sudden, total certainty that my life had just cracked down the middle. I want to explain something about how I processed that morning, because I've thought about it a lot since. In the military, they train you to compartmentalize, not to suppress, to compartmentalize. There's a difference. You learn to take the thing that's screaming inside you and put it in a box, seal the box, and keep functioning, because the mission doesn't stop because your hands are shaking. I used that training in Kuwait more than once. I used it that morning at my desk at TechSphere. I didn't cry. I didn't confront her. I sat up straight, rested my hands on the keyboard, and let my fingernails dig little half-moons into my palms until the sting gave me something else to focus on. One thought echoed, clean and cold. I need to know everything. By the time an assistant tapped on the glass to tell me Gregory wanted a quick project briefing, I'd already made a decision. I was not going to detonate this. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly how deep it went. I sat through that briefing like I was watching it from somewhere outside my own body. Gregory walked the small conference room through Sentinel Wealth Partners' projected growth numbers, their marketing angle, the veteran advocacy groups they'd already lined up as informal partners. I nodded in the right places. I even asked a sharp question about their compliance disclosures, because some part of my training doesn't shut off even when the rest of me is quietly falling apart. Nobody in that room had any idea that the founder of the company we were discussing had, less than an hour earlier, been revealed to me as a stranger wearing my husband's face. When the meeting ended and it was just Gregory and me packing up our laptops, he glanced at me and said, "You all right, Major? You seem a little far away today." "Just adjusting to civilian pace," I said, and managed something close to a real smile. 9 months in a war zone, 3 weeks in a conference room. It's an adjustment. He laughed easy, unaware. "Fair enough. Take it slow. We're glad to have you." I walked back to my desk, on legs that didn't quite feel like mine, and there was Paige typing away, glancing at the photo frame every few minutes with the kind of unguarded happiness that used to be mine too, once before I understood what it had cost. The first few days blurred together into a strange kind of endurance exercise. I sat 3 feet from my husband's fiancée, because that's what she was now, a fiancée, a word that belonged to me. And I listened to her talk about him like he was the best thing that had ever happened to her. "He proposed with this ring," she told me one morning, holding up her hand again. "I actually asked him once why he never wears a wedding band-style ring himself, you know, like some guys do before they're even married. And he said the one he does wear," she tapped the small gold band on his hand in a photo pulled up on her phone, "that's actually in memory of a friend of his, someone he served with. He said it means more to him than any diamond ever could." Ugh, I had to look away from my screen for a second. That ring had been mine, my wedding band, sitting on his finger every single day of our marriage, and he had turned it into a story about honoring the fallen. He had taken something sacred to people like me, the memory of someone who didn't come home, and used it as a prop in his lie. It was, without question, the cruelest detail I would learn about my husband. And I would learn plenty. Paige, to her credit, wasn't a fool. She wasn't some naive girl stumbling blindly through a fairy tale. Later that week, over lunch with a few coworkers, one of the guys from design teased her, "Come on, you chased a guy like that down at a conference? That takes nerve." Paige laughed. He was so hesitant at first. Kept saying he didn't have time for a relationship, that his work came first. I just didn't let him off the hook. She said it with pride, like persistence was a virtue, and maybe in another version of this story it would have been. I filed that detail away too. Not to blame her. She'd been deceived as thoroughly as I had, but because it told me something about how deliberately Derek had constructed his resistance. A man who says no at first, who plays hard to get, who lets himself be convinced. That's not caution, that's technique. That afternoon, back at my desk, I opened my personal social media account out of habit and stared at my own privacy settings for a long moment before I understood something with total clarity. My account had been locked down since the day I was commissioned. Every photo of Derek and me set to friends only, nothing public, no location tags. It's standard practice for anyone in my line of work who handles sensitive information. We're trained on personnel security protocols the same way civilians are trained on fire drills. I had simply never thought about what that protection was also doing. It was hiding me from her for 3 years. I remember sitting with that realization for a long time, turning it over the way you turn over a piece of shrapnel someone's just handed you, trying to understand exactly how it had gotten there. Every service member who handles anything sensitive gets the same briefing early in their career. Lock down your accounts, watch your geotags. Never make it easy for anyone to map your life from the outside. It's meant to protect us from people who wish us harm. I had followed that guidance faithfully for over a decade, the way you follow a rule so old it stops feeling like a choice. I had never once imagined it would end up protecting the person doing the harming instead. There's a particular kind of grief in realizing that a part of your character, your caution, your discipline, the very things that made you good at your job, became the exact tool someone else used against you. It wasn't a flaw that let this happen, it was a virtue weaponized. I sat with that for a long time before I was able to set it down and keep moving. Paige had followed Derek's public professional page, the one where he posted about conferences and market commentary and, now, Sentinel Wealth Partners. There wasn't a single photo of me on it, there never had been. He hadn't needed to hide anything. My own carefulness had built his alibi for him. That night, I called Dana. Dana Reyes and I went through officer training together 11 years ago, back when we were both too young to understand what the uniform would eventually cost us and give us in equal measure. She's JAG now, a Judge Advocate General's Corps officer, the Army's version of a lawyer, except her clients are soldiers and her caseload includes things civilian attorneys rarely touch. I called her from the small home office in our apartment, door shut, voice low. Dana, I need you to talk me through something. Off the record, as a friend first. Always, she said. I could hear her setting something down on the other end. What's going on? I told her everything, the photograph, the 3 years, the ring, my ring, repurposed into a story about a fallen brother in arms. Her voice went very quiet and very careful, the way it does when she shifts into legal mode without announcing it. Bree, walk me through this slowly. Are you certain? 100%. I've seen the picture, Dana. I know that beach, I know that shirt, I know the man in it better than I know my own hands. She exhaled slowly. Okay, then here's what I need you to understand, and I need you to hear it as your friend and as someone who's seen this exact situation blow up badly for other service members. This isn't just a divorce case. Because of your rank, your benefits, and his business, this touches military-specific law most civilian attorneys have never even heard of. There's the standard stuff, equitable distribution, dissipation of marital assets, all that. But there's also USFSPA, the Former Spouses Protection Act. Right. It governs how military retirement pay gets divided in a divorce. And depending on what he's done with joint funds, this could also touch your SGLI. Her voice sharpened slightly. Bree, I need you to check something for me tonight. Has he had access to your SGLI beneficiary designation? My stomach dropped. Service members group life insurance, $500,000 payable to whoever I'd named. He's my husband, Dana. Of course he has access to the paperwork. He doesn't have access to change it. That requires my DS Logon credentials. Good, she said. That's good. But I want you to check the folder where you two keep shared documents. Tonight. Not because I think something's happened. Because I want to know, not guess. I hung up and walked straight to the small filing cabinet in our office. It took me 20 minutes of careful, methodical searching, the same kind of methodical I use auditing a unit's budget, before I found it, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns. A partially completed SGLI beneficiary change form. My name was still listed as the primary, but there, in the proposed new beneficiary field, in Derek's handwriting, was a name I didn't recognize at first glance, until I did. Paige Sullivan. The form was incomplete. It required my digital signature through the DS Logon system, something only I could authorize. He hadn't been able to finish it, but he had started it. Ugh. I sat on the floor of our office for a long time, the paper in my lap, and I did something I hadn't let myself do since the picture frame. I let one single tear fall, and then I wiped it away and put the form in a folder of my own. If I hadn't come home from that last deployment, if something had happened to me overseas the way it happens to people I served with, people whose names are engraved on walls I've stood in front of, my husband had been laying the groundwork to make sure the woman he was building a second life with would be the one left standing with $500,000 and a clean conscience. I didn't sleep that night. Over the next several days, I did what I was trained to do. I gathered intelligence. I logged into MyPay, the DFAST portal every service member uses to manage pay and allotments, the automatic monthly transfers the military lets you set up for mortgages, savings, whatever you need moved automatically. Derek had always handled our joint finances. It was, in hindsight, a convenient arrangement for a man running a second household. I scrolled through 12 months of statements, groceries, utilities, the mortgage on our apartment, normal life, line after line. And then, buried in the noise, a recurring monthly transfer to something called PS Creative Consulting LLC. I stared at those initials for a full minute before it clicked. P.S. Paige Sullivan. It wasn't her name outright. He was smarter than that, or at least he thought he was. I spent an hour that evening doing exactly what my job had trained me to do, pulling New York business registration records, cross-referencing the LLC's filing address with an apartment building 3 blocks from Sentinel Wealth Partners' office. The registered agent's name matched a common variation of Paige's. It wasn't the smoking gun to a stranger. To someone trained to read financial statements for a living, it was unmistakable. Over the past year, that account had received just over $41,000 from our joint funds. I sat back from the laptop for a moment, letting that number settle. $41,000 is not a mistake. It's not a single weak moment or a lapse in judgment. It's a pattern, deliberate and maintained, the kind of thing that requires someone to sit down once a month and decide, again and again, to keep doing it. I thought about all the nights Derek had told me he was reviewing quarterly filings after I'd gone to bed. I thought about how proud I'd always been of him for being so disciplined about our finances, so hands-on, so willing to spare me the tedium of spreadsheets while I was managing budgets for an entire battalion overseas. He hadn't been sparing me anything. He'd been making sure I never looked too closely. Then I found the $50,000 wire, a single, larger transfer, drawn from our joint savings 6 weeks earlier. Recipient, a title company handling reservation deposits for a new development in Hudson Yards. I already knew from Paige's own excited chatter at lunch exactly what that $50,000 had bought. A reservation deposit, not a full down payment, she'd later clarify with the pride of someone repeating information she didn't fully understand, but enough to lock in their future home. A place Derek told her he was saving for their life together after the wedding. He said he doesn't want me to see where he's living now. Paige had told me over lunch that same week, entirely unprompted, glowing with the kind of trust that made my chest ache on her behalf. He said it's not right for the place we build a life in. He wants that to be something we choose together after we're married. I think that's actually really sweet. Very intentional. Intentional. That was one word for it. I want to describe one more piece of that week because it's the part I still think about most. 2 nights after I found the wire transfer, I did something I'm not entirely proud of, though I've made my peace with it. I told Derek I had a late meeting with the vetting team, which wasn't technically a lie since I did stay late. Just not in the building, he thought, and I sat in a rental car outside the address listed on the Sentinel Wealth Partners registration paperwork, a modest office suite in a converted building near the Flatiron District. At 6:40, I watched Derek walk out the front entrance. A few minutes later, Paige came out to meet him, practically running the last few steps before he caught her in a hug that lasted a beat too long for 2 people who supposedly hadn't seen each other since lunch. He opened the passenger door of a car that wasn't the sensible sedan we owned together, a car I didn't recognize at all, which told me with a small cold clarity that there were details of his life I hadn't even begun to uncover yet. I followed them at a careful distance, the kind of following you learn instinctively when you spent years reading terrain and predicting movement, though I'd never once imagined I'd use those instincts on my own husband. They drove to Hudson Yards, parked, and walked into the glass-fronted sales center for the development where his $50,000 deposit now sat. I stayed on the far side of the street, half hidden by scaffolding, and watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as a broker in a sharp suit gestured toward an architectural model of the building, walking them through floor plans like they were any other young couple building a life. Paige leaned into Derek's shoulder, laughing at something the broker said. Derek rested a hand on the small of her back, a small, unconscious gesture of ownership that made my stomach turn in a way none of the financial documents had managed to. I took photographs. Not out of some need to torture myself further, but because I understood even in that moment. that a photograph of the two of them standing in front of a model of their future home would mean something very specific to a judge, to an investor, to anyone who needed to understand exactly how deliberate all of this had been. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a weak moment in a hotel room after too much wine. It was a man building an entire second architecture of his life, brick by brick, while his actual wife was 12 time zones away, making sure a battalion's supply budget balanced to the dollar. I drove home that night and sat in our dark kitchen for a long time before Derek got back, turning the photographs over in my mind, filing them into the same mental compartment where I'd been storing everything else. When he finally came in, humming faintly, hanging his coat in the same closet he always did, I said nothing. I made him tea, the way I did most nights, and I watched him drink it without the faintest idea that his wife had spent the evening 20 minutes away, documenting the exact shape of his betrayal. I called Dana again that night with everything laid out. The LLC, the wire transfer, the SGLI form. She was quiet for a long moment. Bree, this is no longer a suspicion. This is a documented pattern of financial abuse layered under an affair. I want you to understand what that means. Legally, dissipation of marital assets, potential fraud, depending on how those LLC transfers were structured and depending on jurisdiction. This could also affect how a judge views the division of his business, because Sentinel Wealth Partners may have been partially capitalized with funds that were never his to spend. What do I do? Nothing yet, she said firmly. The second he suspects you know, he'll scrub every trace of this. You document. You back everything up to a secure drive. You send copies to my personal email, and you wait for the right moment. Tell me, is there an event coming up? A launch? A pitch? Anything public? I thought of the folder Gregory Stanton had given me on my first day. There's a launch event. Sentinel Wealth Partners. Investors, veteran advocacy partners, some press. 2 weeks from now. Dana's voice went very calm, the way it does right before she walks into a courtroom. That's your moment. And Bree, you don't need to sneak into that room. You're on the vetting team for that partnership. You have every professional right to be there. Let him be surprised that you showed up exactly where your job sent you. I almost laughed. It was the first genuinely lighter feeling I'd had in 2 weeks. The realization that I wasn't going to have to break any rules to end up standing in that room. My husband's arrogance, his belief that a company with thousands of employees would somehow never put his wife and his fiancé within 100 feet of each other, was about to hand me the stage. I want to be honest about something, because it would be easy to make this next part sound cleaner than it actually felt. I didn't spend those 2 weeks moving through my days with cold, mechanical certainty. There were nights I sat in our bathroom with the shower running so Derek wouldn't hear me letting myself feel the full weight of it for exactly as long as the water stayed warm, and then turning it off and going back out to a man who had no idea his wife had just finished grieving him while he watched television 20 feet away. There's a particular kind of loneliness in mourning, a marriage that technically hasn't ended yet. You're a widow to something that's still walking around your kitchen in its socks. One night, unable to sleep, I drove out to the small overlook near the Hudson River piers. The same kind of place I used to go before deployments when I needed to sit with something too big to carry into the house. I called my mother, who still doesn't fully know what I do for a living beyond something with numbers for the Army, and I let her talk to me about nothing in particular, her garden, a neighbor's new dog, the church potluck, until my hand stopped shaking enough to drive home. I never told her what was happening. Some things you protect people from until you've already survived them. The 2 weeks that followed tested every ounce of discipline I'd built over 14 years in uniform. I went home every night to a man who kissed my forehead and asked about my day. I told him small, true things. A meeting ran long. The coffee in the break room was terrible. My new coworker seemed nice. I never mentioned Paige by name, though it took everything in me not to watch his face for a flicker of recognition every time I almost did. How's the internship going? He asked one night, stirring pasta at the stove, so at ease in our kitchen, it made my skin crawl. Good, I said. They've got me vetting a partnership deal. Financial services firm, actually. Military-focused. I watched him carefully, not even a flicker, total practiced calm. Yeah, small world. I've got a launch event coming up myself. New firm, big night. That's exciting, I said, and meant every syllable of the sentence's construction, if none of its warmth. What's it called? Sentinel Wealth Partners. He smiled, proud of himself, utterly unaware he was standing in his own kitchen confessing to his wife. Whole mission is serving families like yours, Bree. People who've given everything to this country. I built it thinking of you, honestly. I had to turn back to the salad I was making so he wouldn't see my face. At the office, Paige and I kept working 3 feet apart. She showed me swatches for bridesmaid dresses she was considering for a wedding I already knew wouldn't happen. She showed me the Sentinel Wealth pitch deck, genuinely proud, asking for my marketing feedback, unaware she was showing her fiancé's wife the exact document that would help take him down. He said I'm his true partner in everything. She told me one afternoon, beaming over the deck's mission statement, a paragraph about honoring military families that Derek had almost certainly asked me to help proofread 2 years earlier. Back when it was still just an idea he talked about over dinner. Partner in everything. I wondered how many times he'd said that same phrase to me. There was a version of that week where I could have let bitterness toward Paige take root and grow into something ugly, and I want to be honest that I felt the pull of it more than once. It would have been easier in some ways to hate her. Anger needs somewhere to go, and she was right there, 3 feet away, wearing a ring that should have been a warning sign and wasn't. But every time I felt that resentment start to rise, I made myself remember one specific detail. She didn't know. Not about me. Not about the marriage license sitting in a drawer in an apartment she'd never been allowed to visit. She was building a future on a foundation she genuinely believed was solid ground. That wasn't foolishness. That was trust, offered in good faith to a man who'd spent 3 years making sure it was never tested. I thought too about the mission statement itself, about how carefully worded it was, how it invoked service and sacrifice and family in a way clearly designed to make investors feel like they were doing something noble simply by writing a check. Derek had always been good with language like that. He'd used almost the same words on our second date, telling me he admired people who served because they understood something about commitment that most people never had to learn. I remember believing him completely. I remember thinking I found a rare kind of man, someone who respected the weight of the uniform instead of merely tolerating it. It took me 8 years to understand that respecting the language of commitment and actually practicing it are 2 entirely different things, and a skilled enough liar can spend a lifetime only ever doing the first. I didn't hate her. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy to let all of it curdle into resentment toward the woman on the other side of the glass instead of the man responsible for building the wall between us in the first place. Paige had pursued him, yes. She'd told me so herself, with a kind of pride that made me see her a little more clearly, a woman who went after what she wanted and didn't apologize for it. But pursuing a man who lies about his entire life isn't a crime. Believing him is not a moral failure. She had no ring, no photograph, no half-finished insurance form to warn her. I had all 3, and it had still nearly leveled me. The night before the launch event, I sat with Dana in her car outside my apartment building, going over the plan one final time. "You don't raise your voice," she said. "You don't need to. The facts do the work. You state who you are, you state what you found, and you let the room do the rest. And if he tries to spin it, then you have documents." She tapped the thick folder on her lap. Wire transfers, the LLC registration, screenshots of Paige's own texts about the deposit. And Bree, she paused, her voice softening for the first time all night. The SGLI form stays in your back pocket unless you absolutely need it. Some things you don't have to say out loud to know you're right about them. Let that one be for us, not for the room. I nodded. She was right. Some wounds you carry privately, even when you're the one holding all the cards. Before she drove off, Dana reached over and squeezed my hand. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've watched you brief full bird colonels without blinking. You're going to be fine in there tomorrow." "The spiel's different," I admitted. "That was always just numbers. This is my life." "It's the same skill, Bree. You gather the facts, you present them without apology, and you let the truth carry its own weight. You've done it 100 times. You're just doing it in a dress instead of a uniform this time." That line stayed with me all the way up to my apartment through a night of restless half-sleep, through the long, strange stillness of the next morning as I got ready. Not for a briefing, not for a deployment, but for the end of a marriage I'd once have sworn would outlast both our careers. I stood in front of the mirror for a long moment before I left, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't see a woman waiting for a blow to land. I saw someone squaring her shoulders before a mission, the way I'd done 100 times before walking into rooms far more dangerous than a hotel ballroom. The morning of the launch, I woke before my alarm, the way I always used to before a deployment, my body somehow keeping its own schedule regardless of what my mind had planned. I lay there for a while listening to Derek's steady breathing beside me, memorizing without meaning to the last ordinary morning I would ever spend as his wife. When he stirred and mumbled something about a big night ahead, I said, "I know, good luck," and I meant it in a way he could never have understood. I met Dana for coffee that afternoon, both of us reviewing the folder one final time at a small table by the window, watching the city move past outside like nothing unusual was about to happen in it. "Last chance to back out," she said gently, only half joking. "I'm not backing out," I said. "I spent 9 months in a place where the wrong decision could cost people their lives. This is just paperwork with better lighting." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that breaks tension rather than avoiding it. That's the Bree I remember from officer training. All right, let's go make sure the truth has a microphone. The launch was held in a glass-walled event space in Midtown, the kind of room built specifically to make people believe in things. American flags framed the stage in tasteful, understated numbers. A banner behind the podium read Sentinel Wealth Partners, honoring those who served, securing what comes next. I arrived in my TechSphere lanyard, my name already printed clean and official on the guest list Gregory had confirmed for me that morning. Nobody stopped me at the door. Nobody questioned why I was there. I had every right to be in that room, and that fact alone felt like its own quiet form of justice before I'd said a single word. Derek was on stage when I walked in, mid-speech, effortless in his charcoal suit, talking about sacrifice and security and building something that would take care of people like me. Paige stood near the front row in a deep green dress, clapping along, glowing with pride, completely unaware that her fiancé's actual wife was standing 30 feet behind her holding a folder that could end everything. I found a seat near the aisle. I didn't rush. I let him finish his opening remarks. I let the applause die down. I let the moderator open the floor for questions from the audience of investors and partners, several of them wearing veteran organization pins on their lapels. Then I stood. "I have a question," I said, my voice carrying clean and level through the room's careful acoustics. Derek's eyes found me. I watched every ounce of color drain out of his face in real time, watched his jaw go rigid, watched the charismatic founder standing on that stage disappear in the space of half a second. "My name is Major Bree Calloway, United States Army," I said. "I'm currently completing a transition program with TechSphere, one of the partners your team has been courting for this launch. I'm also, for the record, Derek Whitmore's wife. We've been married 8 years. The room didn't gasp so much as go completely suffocatingly still. Somewhere near the front, I saw Paige's hand drop from where it had been resting on the back of her chair. "Allison." Derek started, and I almost laughed at the fact that even now, mid-collapse, he couldn't get through a sentence without reaching for control. "I'm not finished," I said, calm, even. Every head in the room had turned. "I want to be clear that I'm not here to disrupt the business. I'm here because I was assigned in my professional capacity to help vet this partnership before TechSphere puts its name and its investors' money behind it. And in the course of that work, I found something worth sharing with this room before anyone else writes a check tonight." I opened the folder. Over the past year, $41,000 was transferred from a joint account my husband and I share in monthly installments to an LLC registered to the woman standing near the front of this room. I didn't point. I didn't need to. Every eye had already found Paige, whose face had gone the color of paper. 6 weeks ago, an additional $50,000 was withdrawn from our joint savings for a reservation deposit on a property he told her would be their home after their wedding. An older man near the front, silver-haired, wearing a small combat infantryman's badge pin, the kind veterans wear on their lapels for the rest of their lives, set down his glass slowly. "Derek, is this true?" "This is a personal matter," Derek said, his voice cracking at the edges. "It has nothing to do with the firm." "It has everything to do with the firm," I said, and for the first time my voice hardened, just slightly, just enough. "This company's entire pitch is built on the promise of protecting military families' finances. Tonight, I'm telling this room that its own seed capital was partially built on funds taken from a military family without her knowledge or consent." I turned toward the older man. You have a legal right to know that before you commit a single dollar. The murmur that swept the room wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the sound of trust leaving all at once, quiet and total. The same way mine had left me 3 weeks earlier at a desk with a picture frame on it. Paige finally moved. She stepped toward Derek, her voice shaking. You told me you were single. You told me. She stopped, looked at me, then back at him, understanding arriving in real time on her face. The condo. The ring. You used her money for all of it. Paige, baby, I can't explain. Don't, she said, and her voice, for the first time since I'd met her, wasn't soft at all. Don't call me that. She turned to me, tears cutting through her makeup, her eyes full of a pain I recognized because I'd been carrying my own version of it for 3 weeks. Did you know? This whole time, at the office, every day. Did you know? I found out my first day, I said quietly. And I meant every word gently, because none of what had happened was her fault. I'm sorry, Paige, I mean that. She let out a single broken sound and walked out of the room, her heels sharp against the marble floor, and nobody stopped her. The silver-haired investor stood, buttoning his jacket with the finality of a man closing a door for good. Derek, if you've commingled personal misconduct with investor funds and exposed this room to a marital asset claim, this firm is finished before it started. I won't have my name attached to it. He gestured to 2 colleagues nearby, and one by one, like dominoes, the room began to empty. The launch that was supposed to define Derek's future instead became the reason no one in that room would ever return his calls. Derek stood alone at the center of the stage, the banner behind him, honoring those who served, glowing under the lights like the cruelest joke I'd ever witnessed. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I closed my folder, nodded once to Gregory, who was standing near the back, looking somewhere between stunned and quietly proud of me, and I walked out of that room without looking back. In the elevator down, alone, my hands finally started shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer physical release of adrenaline that had been holding me rigid for the better part of an hour. I braced one hand against the mirrored wall and let out a long breath. I felt like I'd been holding since the day I first saw that photograph. Somewhere above me, in a room that had gone from a celebration to a reckoning in under 10 minutes, a company built on a lie was finishing the process of falling apart, and for the first time in weeks, none of it required anything further from me. I had done my part. The rest belonged to the room, to the investors, to Derek himself. A young valet outside the building asked if I needed a car. I told him no, I just needed to walk for a while, and I did. 12 blocks through the cooling evening air, past storefronts closing for the night, past a small group of tourists taking photos in front of a hotel, past all the ordinary indifferent motion of a city that had no idea what had just ended 2 blocks behind it. By the time I reached the subway entrance, my hands had steadied. I felt, strangely, more like myself than I had in weeks, not lighter exactly, but solid, the way you feel after finally setting down something heavy you'd forgotten you were still carrying. I texted Dana from the sidewalk. It's done, she called within seconds. How do you feel? I stood on the corner, watching yellow cabs stream past under a sky just beginning to catch the last orange light of evening. Light, I said, surprised to find it was true. I feel light. Good, she said. Go home, get some rest. Monday, we start the paperwork, the divorce filing, the USFSPA piece for the retirement division, and I'm formally putting a hold on that SGLI beneficiary change with your finance office first thing tomorrow. Just so there's a permanent record it was attempted and never completed. Thank you, Dana, for all of it. That's what I'm here for, she said. Go home, Bree. I took a cab back to our apartment. Derek got there around midnight, his tie loose, his tuxedo jacket gone, looking like a man who'd aged 5 years in 3 hours. I was standing on the balcony when he came in, the wind sharp off the river, the city lit up beneath me the way it always is, indifferent to whatever's falling apart inside any one of its million windows. He stepped out to join me. I noticed, and filed away without comment, that I positioned myself near the door rather than the railing, an old habit from a career spent reading rooms before you're sure you trust them. He gripped the balcony rail, his knuckles going white. Did you have to do it like that? His voice was hollow. In front of everyone? I didn't look at him. Did you have to lie to my face for 3 years, Derek? Did you have to take a ring that stands for someone who died serving this country and turn it into a cover story? He had no answer for that. There wasn't one. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady, empty of the anger I'd expected to feel and instead full of something closer to relief. "My attorney will be filing Monday. You will return every dollar taken from our joint accounts, and given what you attempted with my SGLI paperwork, I'd strongly suggest you not test how far I'm willing to take this." His head turned sharply. "You found that." "I found that." He closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then he turned and walked back inside, and I heard the bedroom door click shut behind him, the last sound I would ever hear him make in that apartment as my husband. I stood on the balcony a while longer, watching the lights ripple on the black water below. I thought about the version of me who'd stepped off that plane 3 weeks earlier, so relieved to be home, so certain that the hardest part of my year was already behind me. I thought about how wrong she'd been, and how much stronger I felt now than I had the day I landed. Sometimes burning something down isn't destruction. Sometimes it's the only way to see what was actually still standing underneath. Divorce isn't fast, even when the facts are clean. It took months, statements filings, a mediation session where Derek, stripped of his charm and his stage, finally agreed to return what he'd taken rather than fight a losing battle in front of a judge who would have had little patience for a man who tried to reroute his wife's life insurance. Dana handled the USFSPA portion with the same precision she brings to every case, making sure my years of service translated into something the law actually protected. Sentinel Wealth Partners folded within 2 months of the launch. No investor wanted their name anywhere near it. Paige and I didn't speak again for almost 6 weeks. Then, one evening, a message came through. Short, careful, clearly written and rewritten before she sent it. "I've had time to think, and I wanted to say thank you for telling the truth instead of letting it keep going. I know it wasn't easy for you either. I hope you're doing okay." I sat with that message for a long time before I answered. "I'm doing okay," I wrote back. "I hope you are too. None of this was your fault, Paige. I mean that." She never replied, and I didn't need her to. Some conversations exist to close a door gently rather than open a new one, and that was enough. I ran into her once more. Months later, entirely by accident, in the lobby of a building neither of us had any real reason to be in at the same time. We stood there for a second, the old habit of small talk rising up automatically between two people who used to sit 3 feet apart every day. She looked well, healthier, somehow, in a way that told me she'd done her own work in the time since. She told me she'd left tech sphere, started over at a smaller firm downtown, one with strict, sensible boundaries about what coworkers were allowed to know about each other's personal lives. "I actually think about that a lot now," she said, almost laughing at herself. "How much I used to just tell everyone everything. I don't do that anymore." "You didn't do anything wrong, Paige," I told her, and meant it as much as I had the night I said it in a room full of strangers. "You loved someone honestly. That's never the part that needs fixing." She nodded, blinked hard, and we said goodbye, like two people who'd survived the same storm from opposite sides of a levee, not close, not exactly friends, but bound by something neither of us would ever have to explain to anyone else who hadn't lived it. I did finish out my skill bridge program at TechSphere, by the way. Gregory kept me on the strategy team through the rest of my transition. And there was something almost funny about spending my last months in uniform helping a company avoid exactly the kind of mess my own husband had tried to build. I completed my separation from active duty that spring. I remember standing outside the gate of the installation on my last day, duffel bag over my shoulder, morning light hitting the flagpole the way it always does, and feeling something I hadn't expected to feel after everything that had happened that year, hopeful. Through a contact of Dana's in the JAG network, I started volunteering with a small nonprofit that runs financial literacy sessions for military spouses, helping people recognize the quiet warning signs of financial control and abuse in a marriage where one partner is frequently deployed and has to trust the other with everything by default. Because there's often no other choice. I talk to spouses who are exactly where I was 3 weeks after I came home, confused, doubting themselves, wondering if they're imagining things. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Trust your instincts before you trust the explanation. I still think about that picture frame sometimes, not with the same gutting pain it caused the day I first saw it, but with something closer to gratitude, strange as that sounds. It forced a reckoning I might have put off for years otherwise, kept safely compartmentalized the way I'd been trained to keep everything else. It taught me that the same discipline that got me through 9 months overseas could also get me through the collapse of everything I thought I was coming home to. 2 weeks ago, Dana called with something new, a flagged account overseas that had surfaced during the final asset review, something Derek apparently hadn't mentioned to anyone, including his own attorney. "Nothing you need to worry about tonight," she said. "But I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the paperwork. There's more here than we thought." I didn't feel dread when she told me. I felt something closer to readiness. Whatever else there is to find, I'm not the same woman who sat frozen at a desk on her first day back from deployment, staring at a photograph, waiting for the ground to stop shaking beneath her. I know how to fight quietly now. I know how to gather what I need before I move. And I know better than I ever did before. That coming home doesn't always mean landing somewhere safe. Sometimes it means landing exactly where you need to be to finally see the truth clearly enough to walk towards something better. There's a woman I met through the nonprofit last month, an Air Force spouse, husband still active duty, 3 kids under 10, who came to one of our sessions because a friend practically dragged her there. Afterward, she stayed behind while the room emptied out and asked me, quietly, almost ashamed of the question, how I'd known, how I'd actually let myself believe what I was seeing instead of finding a reason to explain it away. "I didn't know, not at first," I told her. "Nobody does. You don't walk into these things with proof. You walk in with a feeling you're too afraid to name, and the only real skill is learning to trust that feeling long enough to go looking for the truth, instead of a story that makes it hurt less." She nodded slowly, the way people do when something lands somewhere. It's been waiting to land for a long time. I gave her Dana's number before she left, the same way Dana once handed me a lifeline disguised as a legal pad and a cup of black tea. That's the strange, unexpected gift that came out of the worst month of my life. Not bitterness, not even, really, anger anymore, though I won't pretend it never visits. What I carry now is something closer to purpose. The understanding that the same discipline the Army spent 14 years building in me, the ability to stay steady when everything around me was designed to knock me down, was never just for deployments. It was always going to be for whatever came next, whatever version of the fight I'd eventually have to face closer to home. I think about the woman I was on that first morning at Tech Spear sometimes, sitting perfectly still at a desk staring at a photograph, forcing her hands to stay steady on a keyboard while her entire life quietly came apart 3 feet away from a stranger who had no idea what she'd just walked into. I don't feel sorry for her anymore. I'm proud of her. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She gathered herself, gathered the truth, and walked forward one deliberate step at a time until she was standing in a room full of strangers saying the truest sentence she'd said in 3 years. "My name is Major Bree Calloway, and I am done being lied to." That's what I did, and I'd do it again.